Hello and welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm good, Andy, and this is a special show for us because, well, we recorded it early this week, so we're taking a mini break again in the summer, but we don't want to leave you with nothing, like most podcasts would probably do, but we're going to give you lots of insight this week, and what we're doing is we've produced a Teaching Children About Money special. So we've gone back through the archives and pulled out where we've talked about teaching children about money and compiled it into a skillfully edited podcast. So Andy did the magic in that regard, because in the past we've covered the topic but in different ways for different age groups and different tips. So what we've done is we've pulled together those best bits, but at the end of the podcast we're going to come back on and we're going to update some bits in there, so provide some more insights. But before we kick off, Andy, you've got a review you want to read out.
Yeah, so this one came in from Andy Vet77. The title was Vital, Informative Listening Every Week. And he said, having found the podcast a couple of years ago, it has now become an essential and much looked forward to part of my listening routine. A lot of very useful advice is imparted in each and every episode on a huge range of financial topics. Keep up the good work. So there we go. That was from Andy. If that was you, please do make sure you email us at damien@moneytothemasses.com or Lauren at moneytothemasses.com, because ultimately she'll be the one sending out your Money to the Masses mug. So make sure you claim it. And if there is anyone else out there who would like to earn themselves a Money to the Masses mug, please do the same as Andy did and pop a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice.
Great. So let's kick off with the first clip about teaching children about money. As I mentioned, we cover lots of topics of different age groups, and then we're going to come back at the end with some more insights.
Okay, so the next section is all about teaching kids about money. So what have you got to say about this then?
This came about because I was asked by a journalist this week of the very topic. How do you teach primary school children about money? Because we've got to the point where personal finance education is gone into the national curriculum for secondary schools, but there's not the equivalent for primary schools. It's not compulsory. So how can you teach them? So they asked me, and funny, I actually spoke to a couple of primary school teachers about this and said, what do they think? It's interesting they ask me, but it's far better to ask somebody who deals with children all the time. And one of the things that one of the primary school teachers said to me is that when they ask the small children, like the ones in the early years, so not the 10, 11-year-olds, the ones probably about 5 or 6, when you go to a restaurant or go to the shops, we can't just take things. How do you pay for it? How do we pay for these things? And they sort of look a bit confused at first, and then they go, well, mum or dad just gets their credit card out. And they genuinely think that I think this is the fault of our contactless world, that's how we pay for things. You just get this bit of plastic out and just wave it at people like magic, and then you get whatever you want. And sort of, I think actually a lot of adults still think that's the way, and
yeah,
that's why
right.
Credit is like it is. But the point is that, do you remember when we were younger, you played with money more and you did role play, and actually you dealt with coins? Because adults do. I mean, I admit it. I don't pay with money all that often. If I was to say out of 10 transactions I do, I probably pay with money at most one of them.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
In fact, I actually go out of my way to use card because I like to use online accounts to keep track of my money, and it makes it easier if there's a paper trail. So.
Yeah. So if you want to teach your kids about money, it seems farcical that you'll attempt to do it if they don't even see you using money. So the first thing that parents should do, if they're really that bothered and they want to try and help kids understand money because they don't understand the value of it, is to actually use it in front of them. So when you go pay for meals at restaurants, pay with money and get some change, because how are they going to learn about counting change if you don't do it? Yes, you get play money and role playing, but it's not as good as doing it with the real thing. So that was the tip that came from primary school teachers. And the other ones they said were, of course, teaching kids to save with piggy banks, but doing tiny, small chores around the house to earn the money, because children struggle with the idea, and I think, again, a lot of adults do, or certainly teenagers do, is about not just the monetary value of money, but the value of money in terms of how you earn it. So we know, how much does an Xbox game cost these days? Things like that cost, 50 quid, but do they know how many hours you have to work to get that. And that then starts giving people a value and makes people probably less materialistic and actually value money in a real way. So I thought that was particularly good tips on how to get kids engaging with money. The other thing, I mean, what do you do? Because, I mean, we've both got small children. I mean, what do you do, Andy?
Like you say, I very rarely use cash, but when I do, I try and explain. I mean, I remember my daughter watching me take money out of a cash machine for the first time, and she just thought, she called it the magic money machine. She just thought that you could go up there, put in a special number, and it would just give you money. So we had to explain in quite detail, and we've always been pretty good, I think. We've tried to explain that mummy and daddy, we go to work to earn money, and with that money we can buy things. And, you know, in a very sort of simplistic way, we try and make sure that our children understand the value of money. Of course, we're not perfect. I'm not saying we are, but we do our bit. And we are quite strict at saying no because mummy and daddy can't afford it. It does frustrate me sometimes when people go beyond their means and everyone loves to spoil their children, but I do believe that you can go too far sometimes. Anyway, that's my view.
No, I agree. I agree. I don't think there's any shame in saying you can't afford things. The other things, if you want online resources, personal finance education group, so it's PFEG, so PFEG for short, type that into Google. They are a brilliant resource for teachers, and parents can download the stuff they do, but they do guides for teaching. So, like your wife, she's a teacher, it's that sort of thing that they can actually do. What's the word I'm looking for? Lesson plans, that sort of stuff for teach kids. And there's some great resources on there that are free. Other things you can do is, obviously, like you said, saving and teach them to budget with their own money, and so they get their piggy bank and they go up the shop and buy their sweets. Great. That teaches them how to use money, and it's important they use the actual money they've saved, not some you give them, otherwise it defeats the object of the saving element. But there are other things. If you want to do cards, like something called Osper, OSPER, and something called Go Henry, Google those, and they're pretty much prepaid cards that are set up by like MasterCard and Visa, which you can top up and allow kids to spend on, but they have apps. It means that parents can monitor what goes on with them. So they're actually teach children the positives and how to run money, but in a card world rather than like we say, it's very contactless and we're all doing cards. It helps kids start doing that precursor to running their own bank account. And I've not seen these before. Financial fairy tales. Have you heard of those?
No, sounds interesting. Go on.
They're books. I can't remember the guy who did them, but there are children's story books that have got money kind of morals in them that show them about the aspirations and value of money. So it is generally, you can buy them on Amazon, so financial fairy tales, and they just look like kids' books, you know, with sort of fairies and drawings, but they obviously somewhere in there, a bit like these fables, have got something to do with money. I've not read one, but there are a series of them, and I've seen them recommended by other people, so go and have a look. But actually, whatever happened to playing, I said this to the guy, whatever happened to just playing Monopoly? I mean, these things...
I'm not a massive fan of that game because that is the most dreadful game, because basically you're just treading over everyone to get to the top until everyone's bankrupt. So I'm not sure morally it's the right sort of game for children to play, but I know what you mean, actually physically handing
it's still the same thing of money. I mean... Did anyone ever finish a game of Monopoly? Has anyone in the history of man got to the end where there's one man standing?
And has any family ever played a game of Monopoly where they haven't argued about someone stealing money from the bank?
Yeah, I was going to say, has anybody never played it and stolen money from the bank or never mentioned the fact they've landed on Mayfair and they've got to pay rent? How the hell did it sell millions of copies? And it sort of sparked many different versions. I played a Disney one, actually.
Yeah, I actually bought one for my wife that was personalised. It took about 4 weeks to make, and they send it, you can get it personalised.
Maybe I should get the personalised money to the masses Monopoly set. Now, teaching children about money is a real hot topic. There's some elements of personal finance that happens in school, but what we're talking about is particularly small children. So we're talking kids at primary school and particularly the younger years. But it just shows, I think, how far backwards we've gone in actually educating kids about money, because partly that's down to the fact that money has changed. The way we use money has changed with the age of the internet. So everything's very different from even when we were kids. And one of the things that kids don't understand is how banks work. So there was a funny quote where one child thought that's where all our money was stored, was in the bank. So for everybody, they thought everybody's money was just in this bank held safe. And another kid thought that's where the clothes were and food.
because obviously they hear the word food bank and then they hear the words bank, and they kind of, and if you're a child, you're not going to really know the difference. The fact they're using the term bank as a sort of a play on the actual what a bank is. So
I'm embarrassed to say that the only bank my eldest child has ever been in is Gringotts Bank in Harry Potter world. And so she, in her mind, it's this make-believe thing that's in the movies.
Yeah.
Because I've never taken my child to the bank.
yeah, well, we don't have to go to bank. There was another thing actually the teachers said, which if as an adult you don't always appreciate the things that children do and don't know because you just assume it's a given. One of the things they said that they wish they'd known when they were younger is that you have to pay for utilities. So when you turn on the tap or a light, the reason that is working is because you're paying your bills. And if you don't, then ultimately your electricity wouldn't work. And that all costs money. And the fact that children don't get the fact that that stuff is money. So if you leave the light on, that's costing us money. I know it's not good for the planet either, but it is also costing us. And so to understand that all the things that we buy, everything has a price. And I was talking to my daughter the other day and we had a bizarre conversation about tax. I can't remember how it came up, but I started to explain to her about the idea of tax. She was asking me, well, what do you mean, what's tax? And so I started to break down that how much do you think if I was to earn £100, I would get of that in my pocket? And so she thought that, well, you get £100. When I started to break down to her that, yeah, you won't get that. Even somebody who's earning basic rate tax, you've got to look about 30 quid of that's gone straight away. For some people, it's even more. Then when every time we buy things, there'll be maybe VAT. So she was mortified to think that if for an average person, perhaps, for every £100 they earn, they probably only get about 70 of it. Well, where's the rest of it go? And I said, well, the road we're driving on, who paid for that? Who's paid for all these lights? Who pays for the dustman to come round? And she was marvelling at that. Like, what, they've got all that money, so where is that money? And so she's sitting there thinking...
That's a question that us adults are still asking now.
But the whole idea that all these things are paid for by us. And so children don't get that fact. So this then went into a politics conversation with her. I said, this is why it's important when people get upset about things that happen when you see these politicians on telly and they want to vote for people. That all comes into that to do with politics. It can be quite a nice link to some of the other stuff that they will see in the rest of their lives anyway. So yeah, you can end up having a tax conversation like I did. Now the other thing they recommend you talk about is budgets. So children don't know how to budget or what a budget is because they won't see you do it. And the teachers were suggesting that you should try and engage children with budgeting, even your own budgets, or explain if you don't want to open your finances to your child and therefore the playground and therefore half of their parents, is to talk about something you bought in the past. So good example is a wedding. How did you afford to get married? How much did it cost? And then try and break down how you managed to save for that and budget for it. And that gives them a good example of, yeah, do you know what? You can't just have what you want in life. Another tip is you should try and teach them about the difference between wants and needs. So what you would like and what you actually need. Yeah. So they're not obsessed with the frivolous things in life and consumerism, which is hard. I know that's just children. They don't really understand needs. They just know wants. But trying to get them to understand that, they'll then start to understand what money is and how it works.
Interestingly, you make that point, David, because I think this is possibly more of a problem for the sort of the middle and the upper classes if you want to put people into the social spectrum. Because I bet there are people that have less money, families growing up in more deprived areas, that money is probably more often talked about in their homes because we can't afford this or we need this. So I suppose it's...
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's true. And the other thing I think is and we don't want to be making sweeping generalisations, but people who tend to have less money actually tend to be better with it than those who are affluent. In my experience, I've met some really rich people when I was working in the city. They don't need to be good with money because they got lots of it. And whereas people who are unfortunately haven't got a lot of money at any given moment, they have to be very good and make it go further. So, I mean, I think it's a fair point. Some people will be much better at the wants and needs part of things. I think one universal point nearly all of the teachers said, and I think the people I've spoken to have said about teaching children, is the importance of saving. So they need to learn or try and teach your children basically the art of saving, how to do it and why you need to do it. And so encourage them. There was one suggestion is when they give their children money, pocket money, or they get gifted money from people, they encourage them to put it in one of 3 envelopes. Now, one envelope will be for treating themselves, so be able to go out and spend money. One of them might be for something that may be slightly more middle term in terms of time frame, so saving to go on holiday, or maybe saving some money so they can go out with their friends. And then there'll be another one envelope which is about the long term stuff. So you're trying to get children to think about putting money in separate pots to be able to plan for something in the future, but also be able to go and spend money as well. And then the last one I mentioned on that is one way it can be to encourage them is that if they save money and put it in a piggy bank or wherever they want to put it, then you could actually technically top that up if they get to a certain target. So you could give them, doesn't be crazy, but that gives them an incentive to try and save. And that fundamentally is what a bank works like. Yeah. You put money in a bank.
Pensions and things like
that.
Yeah,
you get money topped up and with interest. So that can encourage that saving incentive. And my funny thing with my daughter, I have the opposite scenario. She's become really shrewd in thinking, right, do you know what, Dad, I'm going to save my money. She saves her money, squirrels it away. Yeah. She's always been like that.
I've got the same. Yeah.
But what my daughter does though, she'll go, right, we're going to go to the shop and she wants to buy something. I said, bring your money. Okay, we'll do that. And then she'll end up spending money she hasn't got enough with her. And so I end up saying, okay, I'll pay for the other £10 on top of that, but you've got to give me your money when I get in. And she banks on the fact, I know she does, that I forget. And then she gets home and it's suddenly her money's not going down. She hates spending her own money, which I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. It's a good that she saves, but I do think we need to teach kids to spend a bit of money. So that's a roundup of the best ways to teach young children about money from the great minds of the people who actually do it for a living. While we're teaching children things, it made me think about teaching children about money. And in the past, I've been asked this by podcast listeners. And one of the things I've always said is to be quite practical about it and let them see you using money in shops. So not just your card, not just tapping your card, but using coins and getting change from a shop. But of course, in lockdown, we can't do that. So it means you have to be a little bit more creative. And it got me thinking. And also, I saw some bits from Hargreaves Lansdown who were talking about how you could teach children about money, some nice resources online. So it got me thinking about, are there some good resources that can help teach children about money? Because it feels like maybe the kids need a break, but at the same time, in this environment, I don't know about you, Andy, but we're all having more uncomfortable discussions probably about money because everybody's feeling the impact of what's going on with the coronavirus, and money is tighter than it's ever been almost. And that's certainly true for most people. And it's not easy to get hold of things, and the cost of things is going up because of demand. And so we're having to have conversations with our children that we wouldn't have previously, almost sheltering them in some way. So a lot of people realise they're having the same conversations about money they probably wouldn't have done. So I thought it's quite nice to talk about some resources online, and there are one or two very good ones. So I'm going to go through a few of them quickly. Most of these we'll put in the show notes for you to be able to look at them, but just to give you the sort of high level, BBC Bitesize does a lot of good stuff online for children. I mean, they used to do, I remember them from when I was younger, doing bite-sized revision for people, for children in their exams, but they do stuff for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, which is obviously in primary school. And there are some good topics they cover in there relating to money. Some of it is mainly mathematics. They don't actually have sections on the curriculum that say about personal finance as such. So it's more about understanding some of the maths that is useful in using money. But where it also gets interesting, if you look at Key Stage 3, which is the point where you're moving on to secondary school, they have some good lessons about working out interest or understanding percentages and rounding and estimation. As I say, we'll put links to these in the show notes. But if you Google Key Stage 3, BBC Bitesize and Working Out Interest and the other titles I've mentioned, you will come across them. But it gets particularly interesting at the sort of 14 to 16 age group, because there is a BBC Bitesize financial decisions guide, and I've looked at it and it's very good. I've listened to it, and that's definitely worth looking at. But probably the best thing I've seen online is the Your Money Matters financial textbook that you can download from young-enterprise.org.uk. Now it's effectively a textbook, but don't be put off. I've downloaded it, looked at it, gone through it, and it's engaging, colourful. It actually looks like something that you'd actually want to pick up and teach children from. There is a teacher's guide that goes alongside it, and this was the textbook that Martin Lewis was behind. He did this in conjunction with Young Enterprise, and he put some money behind it. I think he sent a hardback copy to every school, but you can download a free copy online as a PDF. And if you go through it, it teaches things like saving and spending, borrowing, good and bad debt, risk and reward, investment, student finance, tax and national insurance. I mean, it even talks about issues such as payday loans. It generally works by giving some theory, some examples, gives them some questions to look at, some answers, some case studies of people about, for example, one of them in there is about spending, and they go through and they have case studies of particular people and their spending patterns and habits, how they're influenced by digital marketing. So it gets you thinking about money in a wider context, about how you're influenced to spend and how banks may work. One of the good examples I saw in there, they were doing exercises trying to get children to understand the money that banks make from people's savings. So if they pay a particular interest rate on your savings versus what they make on lending money, then they had to work out how much profit the bank was making. And I think it's always great to understand how the banking system, the finance system works, because that's how you can then understand it, and therefore you can make better financial decisions. So there are discussion topics. I mean, I think it's very good. So I would go and download it. There will be a link in the show notes, and you can use that and go through different topics, print bits out. And I think that is really useful, particularly for children between the ages of 14 and 16.
No, that's brilliant. I'll definitely recommend my eldest look to that. Is there anything though for the younger ones? You and I have both got a younger child, and obviously they can't do the same sort of level of stuff as the older ones.
No, I mean, there aren't so many. I've not come across many online resources, but for the younger children, some of the best suggestions I've seen out there are playing some of the games that involve pretend money. So we're not talking Monopoly. We're talking things like, I mean, there's a game we play called, I think it's called Go to the Shops, which is a very simple game that's almost like a kind of Ludo idea. You're going around a board, but you're buying things from shops using pretend money, so coins. So it's enabling children to be able to work out the cost of something, how many coins it takes to buy a loaf of bread, but also the change they get back. And the aim is just to complete your shopping, not necessarily to have the most money. So it's not trying to teach people to be hoarders or megalomaniacs or anything like that. It's actually just teaching them the idea of being able to use fake money and get change. And I really like it. But the other one I've seen, I think it's something you do, Andy, is you get your children to earn money by doing chores. And so they start to earn money, and therefore they learn the value of it. And that in itself is probably one of the biggest life lessons you can give children.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a recent one this week where my eldest daughter saw a film she wanted as a digital download and said, Daddy, can we get that? I want to get that. And I said, yeah, we can get that. But you either earn it by doing your chores, or, I mean, I think your daughter, Damien's the same as mine. They're hoarders. They tend to cling on to their money. I know that she's got a piggy bank full of money upstairs. So I said, oh, you can give me the money now, and we can buy it now. So anyway, turns out that she chose the first option, which is to earn the money. But yeah, it's helped her understand that things do cost money. You need to work to earn it, which is good.
Fair play to her, Andy. I mean, my daughter is a definite hoarder. She shares the same characteristic. I'm sure we sometimes end up at the shops going to buy. She's going to spend some of her pocket money and deliberately doesn't have quite enough money with her, so I would end up hopefully making up the difference. And she's very shrewd. Let me just say that, very shrewd with money. So, I think it's a great idea doing chores for money. One of the things I was talking to my wife about, that we needed to try and do a bit more of that, partly because to keep our own sanity, because it feels like I'm forever cleaning up the house, and my wife is feeling exactly the same, chasing around after two children when you're in lockdown. It just feels like a grenade goes off in every bedroom probably on like a timer every 15 minutes. The room is decimated with stuff everywhere and toys everywhere, and everybody will be feeling this. You go to sit down at night, and you're just feeling like I'm spending an hour tidying. So maybe I need to get them to be doing that for pocket money. Anyway, that was the financial lessons. I think it's quite nice to have some online resources, and some very good ones, as I say, out there in this period where we can't actually go out physically and teach our children about money by letting them see us use it. Of course, it goes without saying, if you talk about money, that always helps as well. Just get them to understand. I mean, I heard some stories about people thinking, I remember asking my own children, how much do you think a house costs? The answers you get from asking a child, how much do you think a car or house costs? And you get some amazing answers. You really do.
Yeah.
So first of all, Andy, I have to congratulate you on your editing skills once again. But we now want to give a couple of extra insights just to flesh out one or two things I mentioned or we mentioned on the podcast there. One of them I did mention at the top about hourly rates, and one of the tips has always been that if you want to know what your hourly rate is, then divide your gross salary by 2,000. So that is broadly speaking what the typical person would earn on an hourly basis, assuming they work 35 to 40 hours a week. So that will help you in that regard. The other thing, one tip I wanted to mention that will help children going forward is to sit with them and help them buy something online. Now, there is a suggestion that you should do this perhaps once a week, but if they want to buy something, they don't have to go to the shops. In fact, most of us now don't often go to the shops. You'll buy things online from the likes of Amazon. With some of the pocket money apps that we mentioned, they obviously provide cards and it enables children to buy things online. But even if you're using your card to do it, then sit with them, help them do it, or let them see you buying something online for that safety aspect. So you're teaching them about being safe online and avoiding scams going forward. The other thing I would mention is that Kalpana Fitzpatrick is somebody I know very well, and she's a fantastic money journalist. She's worked at a range of publications. I've even done a live event with her in the past, but she actually she's written 2 books, and one of the money books she's written is for adults, but one in particular is for children. It's called Get to Know Money, a fun visual guide to how money works and how to look after it. Now, I've seen the book. It's fantastic. It's aimed at children that are 7 years old and upwards, and it covers sort of those big topics like what do banks do, what happens to your savings, how are taxes spent. So some of the things I touched upon in the podcast today, there is a visual guide to it, and it's very good, so I would recommend that. And if you go and look on Amazon, you can even pick up a Kindle edition. Monopoly, Andy, you and I were laughing about Monopoly in the office because there was a general vibe of this podcast that we don't like Monopoly, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was, yeah.
And I went on holiday recently and I rediscovered Monopoly because we had downloaded the board games of all historic board games, things like Cluedo, Monopoly. You can download them via apps on your phone or iPad, so your tablet. And we had Monopoly. And the way Monopoly can work is there is a faster version of playing Monopoly whereby you start the game with a small selection, say 3 properties already randomly. They speed up the process of the banking because the app does it all. There is no banker. And the game ends when the first person goes bust. So what happens is you get Monopoly, but you get a quicker version of it. So the thing that used to be frustrating to go on forever, typically when we played it, a game wouldn't last more than probably an hour or so. And the best thing about it being on an app, you just pass the tablet to the next person when it's their turn, and you can be doing something else, watching telly and only half paying attention to it. So I grew to really like it. It's now become a bit of a family favourite, and okay, part of that's the technology aspect, but it's because it's taken out the parts of the game that were slightly tedious, but also what it has done, because it's applied rules that speed the game up, it also means that a lot of it is about negotiating now. So you end up having to negotiate with each other to try and complete your set so you can start building hotels and properties. So in that regard, it was fascinating to see my 2 children, so my 13-year-old and my 7-year-old, negotiating like they're on some kind of apprentice show, trying to strike up deals to be able to complete sets. And it was brilliant to see that their skills in negotiating rapidly improved to the point where I did feel that sometimes I was actually getting scammed. So the message is don't dismiss Monopoly entirely. And what was funny, independently, Andy came into the office and started talking to me about Monopoly as well.
Yeah, that's right. We're in the middle of the summer holidays at the moment, and the girls are clearing out their rooms, and we've got old games. And Monopoly inevitably fell onto the table, and it was going to go down the charity shop. And I said to the girls, come on, let's give this one last go. It is a fun game if we can make it fun. And I discovered, just like you did, Damien, with the app, there is a quicker version to the main game as well. And it's actually within the normal Monopoly rules. I had a quick look at that. We set up the board. And I have to say, it did take an hour or 2, but we played that quicker version of the game. The children were handling money, they were doing deals. And by the end of it, that Monopoly game was taken off the charity pile and it's back up in the room. So I'm quite pleased that happened, to be honest. It was a good discovery, and we're back playing Monopoly. So yeah, I, like you, Damien, I'm going to go back on what I said however many years ago. I'm back onto Monopoly, even to the point where when I'm going on holiday, I've even made a couple of extra purchases which are Monopoly based. I've bought a couple of Monopoly card games, which I'm holding up on the screen now so Damien can see. You can't see these at home, but it's Monopoly Bid and Monopoly Deal, 2 card games that simplify the game of Monopoly but get the children involved with money.
Have you played them yet, though?
So we played Monopoly Bid last night. The children absolutely loved it. And we've scheduled a game of Monopoly Deal, which is the other card game from Monopoly. And we're doing that one tonight. So,
Right,
I will feed back next week.
Right, so you can next week feedback, Andy. It might make it onto the pod, but I'm intrigued because I am a big game fanatic. Actually, I've got loads of board games. Our spare room at home is just almost a pile of different board games. I end up buying games from abroad that can't be sourced in this country because they weren't manufactured here. So I've got so many games. So I'm always intrigued and on the lookout for a new game, especially if it's money related. And the final point I just want to make before we finish the show is that one topic I don't think we cover in there in any detail is inflation. Given the period of time that we're in at the moment and where prices are going up, the cost of living crisis, and inflation is a topic that as adults we are concerned with regularly, I think it's something that could be useful to start to teach children about, because inflation inevitably leads into other topics about money, particularly if you have teenagers who are understanding some of the more economic side of things. You can start to teach them about inflation, rising prices. You can teach them about things like investing. It inevitably leads on to topics such as interest rates. So inflation, even at its most basic level, understanding what it is and how it works and the impact it has on people, I think now is a good time to have that discussion because we're all living it.
Okay, so there we have it. A little bit different this week, but we'll be back as normal next week. Please do get in touch with us if you'd like us to cover anything that we haven't and you think we should. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Do review the podcast if you can. And don't forget, we've got all those usual things, the YouTube channel, the Money to the Masses community group on Facebook. And to Damien, all that's left to say for this week is until next time.
Until next time.